As I hit rock bottom, the world around me began to warp and twist, like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. The emptiness that had been gnawing at my soul since my family abandoned me and I lost my job had become a chasm, and I was free-falling into its depths. Booze was my only solace, a numbing balm that dulled the pain but only made the darkness more complete. I was a shadow of my former self, a specter haunting the streets, searching for scraps to fill the void. Every morning was a desperate scramble for survival. Every night a drunken haze under the faint glow of streetlights that seemed to mock me with their feeble light. I was a ghost, a whispered rumor of a life that once was, fading with each swig of cheap liquor. And then, like a mirage on a desert highway, a man appeared. John was his name, and he was an oasis of calm in the midst of chaos. His eyes were too bright, his smile too wide, but I was too far gone to care. He offered me a way out, a warm bed, a full belly, and the promise of redemption. I was a drowning man clinging to a lifeline, and I grabbed it with both hands. We shared a meal that tasted like ashes in my mouth, and then he drove me to the shelter he called his family legacy. The word sent a shiver down my spine, but I was too far gone to wonder why. As we pulled up to the shelter, a sprawling monstrosity of a building that loomed over the street like a specter, I felt a creeping sense of unease. Something was off, but I was too desperate to care. As we descended into the woods, the city's neon glow gave way to an inky blackness that seemed to swallow us whole. The trees loomed above us like sentinels, their branches creaking ominously in the wind. I felt a growing sense of unease as the GPS led us deeper into the wilderness, the silence between us punctuated only by the soft hum of the engine. When I asked John about our destination, he smiled, his eyes glinting with a knowing light that made my skin crawl. "My father's legacy," he said, his voice low and soothing, but with a hint of something else beneath. "A place where you can find peace, away from the troubles of the world." But his words felt like a thin veneer, a mask that hid something darker beneath. As we arrived at the gate, I felt a jolt of trepidation. The wall was high and imposing, topped with barbed wire that seemed to snarl at me like a beast. The security cameras watched us with cold, dead eyes, their lenses glinting like tiny mirrors. "Safety is our top priority," John said, his smile stretching across his face like a rictus. As the gate clanged shut behind us, I felt a shiver run down my spine. We were trapped. Inside, I was greeted by two women who seemed to be twins, their faces identical in their bland plastic smiles. They welcomed me with a chorus of saccharine sweetness, their eyes glinting with a knowing light that made me feel like a specimen under a microscope. The caregiver, or so she claimed, led me to a small, sterile room where she produced a syringe with a flourish. "Just a routine checkup," she said, her voice dripping with honey. "For your own good and for the safety of others." I felt a surge of unease, but my desire to escape the streets and find a way out of my addiction overrode my doubts. I submitted to the blood test, feeling a cold dread creeping up my spine as the needle bit into my skin. The shelter's interior was a jarring contrast to the foreboding exterior, its sterile hallways and rooms a testament to the eerie efficiency of its operations. As I was led to my assigned quarters, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being processed, like a specimen in a lab. The warm shower was a welcome respite, but the water seemed to strip away more than just the grime of the streets. It left me feeling vulnerable, exposed. At dinner, I was introduced to the other residents, their faces a blur of quiet desperation. They seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Lisa, the caregiver, hovered over us, her smile a thin-lipped mask that hid something beneath. The man I struck up a conversation with, a gruff but affable guy who'd been there for 4 months, seemed to be hiding secrets of his own. The spoke of the weekly graduations with a forced enthusiasm, his eyes darting nervously around the room as if he feared being overheard. I sensed that he was trying to convey a message, but the words got stuck in his throat. Then John appeared, camera in hand, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity as he recorded us like lab rats in a maze. The explanation, that the shelter's sponsors needed updates, felt like a flimsy excuse, a thin veil for something more sinister. I felt like a pawn in a game I didn't understand, a game where the stakes were higher than I could imagine. But I was too far gone to care, too desperate for a way out of the darkness that had consumed me. I told myself that here I could find redemption, that I could claw my way back to some semblance of a life. But as I looked around the table, I saw only the haunted eyes of my fellow residents, and I wondered if we were all just waiting for our turn to disappear. That first night, the shelter's facade of comfort began to crack, revealing the darkness that lurked beneath. In the dead of night, I was jolted awake by the soft whisper of my name, the voice like a cold breeze that sent shivers down my spine. It was a voice that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at the same time, a voice that made my skin crawl. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, but it lingered, a constant presence that watched me from the shadows. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that the shelter was hiding secrets behind its sterile walls. I decided to investigate, to follow the sound of the voice to its source. As I crept down the hallway, the silence seemed to grow thicker, like a fog that clung to my skin. I was stopped dead in my tracks by a sharp voice, a caregiver who seemed to appear out of nowhere. Her eyes narrowed, her gaze a warning that made my heart skip a beat. "That area is off limits," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "We have pests, creatures that wouldn't take kindly to residents." But I saw something in her eyes, a flicker of fear that she quickly suppressed. When I mentioned it to my friend, he grew tense, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "Don't go poking around," he whispered. "You don't want to know what's going on here." He told me about the weekly parties, the graduations that seemed more like disappearances. The residents who left never said goodbye, never looked back, and the next morning, a new face would appear, like a replacement part in a machine. "It's like they're interchangeable," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Like we're just placeholders." A creeping sense of dread had taken hold of my mind, refusing to let go. Why were certain areas of the shelter off limits? And why did residents vanish without a word? I knew I had to uncover the truth, and the next party seemed like the perfect opportunity. The evening of the celebration was shrouded in an eerie atmosphere, the dimmed lights and unsettling music making my skin crawl. I watched John with a hawk's eye, his smile a grotesque parody of warmth, his eyes empty and cold. As the night wore on, I felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that something was building, something terrible. When I finally retreated to my room, the whisper returned, louder and more insistent, a desperate plea for help. I could feel the weight of footsteps outside my door, heavy and deliberate, moving toward me with an unholy purpose. The next morning, my friend was gone, just as he'd feared. John's explanation, that his family had picked him up, was a blatant lie, a cruel joke. I knew then that I had to escape, no matter the cost. I feigned an injury, pretending to have broken my ankle, and demanded to be taken to the hospital. John's reluctance was palpable, but I insisted, playing the part of the injured victim to perfection. When we arrived at the hospital, I saw my chance and seized it, pulling the doctor aside and begging him to call the police. The officers who arrived seemed skeptical at first, but as I recounted my tale, I saw a glimmer of understanding in their eyes. They promised to investigate, to uncover the truth about the shelter and its sinister occupants. As I lay in my hospital bed that night, I felt a fragile sense of peace, a sense of freedom that I hadn't known in months. But I knew it was fleeting, that the shelter's reach was long and its influence deep. I was far from safe, and I knew it. The next morning, the two officers returned, their faces etched with a mixture of horror and disgust. They sat beside my bed, their eyes somber, and revealed the unspeakable truth. Behind the locked door, in the forbidden section of the shelter, they had discovered a chamber of unspeakable horrors. The air was thick with the stench of death, and the walls ran red with the blood of the damned. Jars of human organs lined the shelves, a ghastly collection of body parts harvested from the very people who had sought refuge in the shelter. And beneath the floorboards, in shallow graves, lay the dismembered bodies of the graduates, their lives brutally cut short by John's twisted desires. The officers' words dripped with revulsion as they described the atrocities they had uncovered. John's charity was a front, a facade for a monstrous organ trafficking operation that preyed on the most vulnerable. He had lured in the desperate and the lost, documenting their lives for his sponsors, who were actually clients clamoring for black market organs. And once a deal was made, John would perform the surgeries himself, his hands stained with the blood of his victims. I felt a chill run down my spine as the officers spoke, my mind reeling with the horror of it all. I had come so close to becoming his next victim, my body nothing more than a commodity to be bought and sold. The police assured me that John had been apprehended, his accomplices tracked down and brought to justice. But even now, as I lay in the hospital bed, my soul felt scarred by the experience. The whispers in the darkness still echoed in my mind, the pleading voices of the lost souls warning others to stay away from the shelter that had promised hope, but delivered only terror. I knew that I would never be the same, that a part of me had been forever changed by the horrors I had witnessed.